RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everyone. I am your co-host, Matthew Baum, CEO and co-founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 15,000 folks from all across the globe who are passionate about revenue operations. You can learn more about the community at RevOpsCoop.com, but that is not what we are here to chat about on the podcast today. I am with Nabeil Alazzam, who is the CEO and founder at Forma.ai. Forma.ai is a sales performance operating system for the enterprise. And Nabeil, I'll actually let you, one, tell us a little bit more about yourself and then add anything to that company description, because I think it lends some credibility to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is how to better use data in your 2025 sales planning process, everything from territories to quotas to sales incentive plans. So Nabeil, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Forma.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, Matt, thank you for having me on, and great to be sharing this and having a discussion with the community today. So my background, I worked in management consulting, supporting large enterprises in the Fortune 100s on exactly the topic that we talked about today, territory, quota setting, and comp plan design. And when I did that as a consultant, most of these projects were about taking the customer's data and applying the frameworks that we had as consultants to come up with an answer, which was usually like a deck or a presentation that we'd share with the client. And we would do all this analysis. In some of my projects, we'd have a team of 30 analysts on these massive multi-seven-figure projects where it's like you're doing months of work to come in with this recommendation, and the recommendation is stale the moment it's delivered, right? Like it's based off of data that was pulled 3 months ago. By the time it goes and gets incorporated and executed on within the business, the markets have changed, things have come up, there's new dynamics at play. And it's only more so the larger the organization. And so I saw this kind of lag. The larger the organization was, this lag between how long it takes to ingest and get all the data from all the various sources, market data, current sales data, the attribute of your products, customers, et cetera, into a process to calculate, and then how long it takes you to execute only got bigger. So the lag between idea and execution, I started to see these projects where, it would take 12, 18, 24 months before you can actually execute on a pivot and go-to-market strategy. And on the other side, you look at marketing and you're like, wait a sec, you go from idea to execution on almost an individualized customer basis. We're tailoring the experience for each individual customer based off of the attribution of where they've touched. Why are we not doing this level of sophistication on sales? And that led me to found Forma back in 2016. And the premise of Forma.ai is to leverage data science and analytical capabilities at scale by bringing every part of that sales performance management system into a single unified platform, right? So territory, quotas, all the way through the sales comp design and the communication calculation for the reps into one single system to enable you to do planning and execution in one system, go from idea to execution as fast as you need to. And we do that for large organizations like the 3Ms of the world, Stryker, Autodesks, and many others that are managing global sales teams in the tens of thousands at scale. So
yeah, it's a big problem, big challenge. And like you said, it only gets like exponentially harder as companies grow in size and complexity. And I think like I've talked to now a variety of founders who have built products, and they all, one of the common themes, which again, like this may sound obvious, but isn't the case always, is like you start by essentially like solving a problem for yourself, right? Like you were like, hey, why on earth are our clients spending $1 million+ and why are we devoting 30 plus analyst resources on these projects and problems when the output is going to be, like you said, stale the minute that it gets delivered, right? There's got to be a better way. So I love that. But let's actually start to dive into those three different areas, because it's one, we're in the last weeks now of 2024. So theoretically, people should be in full-fledged kind of planning mode for 2025. Those that do planning correctly, though, the whole notion of planning never really stops, right? Like you should always be building your plan, executing against your plan, comparing your results. So whether you listen to this podcast episode in Q4 or any other quarter, right, should be applicable. So let's start with, I guess, the territory side of things. And I think like this is an area that's changed a lot, right? And I've seen a lot recently on like geographic territories, like we shouldn't use territories, we should use like books or like books of accounts. So I guess talk to us first just about like one, what does, as you all see the world at Forma AI, like what do territories mean? How are they defined? And then we'll take things from there. I've got some more questions for you after that.
Yeah, I think you should always take a customer-centric view of this. So a territory, at the end of the day, is just a clean way for us to organize which rep should be covering or touching specific customers for the specific sales motion that you want. And I say that we should always be thinking about it from the customer-centric point of view is if you have a business where the customer universe is unknown and very large, then the geographic concept of territory, even if it's in an inside selling role, is somewhat makes sense. I think you can kind of discern patterns from geographic base, especially again if there's data tied to your business. But it becomes very obvious to everyone in the organization, okay, this sales rep from this geography is supporting these prospects and these customers. In an ideal state, you have your universe of prospects and customers, and when the moment when you have that baked out, you almost always defer to a book of business, a set account that's assigned to a set rep for a specific product category or sales motion. And the reason why you almost always defer there is because that mapping is going to produce a better customer outcome. You can start to build into systems and workflows. You know exactly which reps should be supporting. It feeds into it feeds into quota setting. That is the ideal that we shift towards, but that's not always possible. And in some businesses, you're better off using other concepts to build up territories if your universe of customers is not readily available.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so geographies are a concept of territories, but geographies are not territories in all.
Yeah, cases. And actually one thing that we see commonly done very well and then not well is how you map your territories to reps. So you should almost always have an intermediary layer, right? Anytime that in your systems you've hard coded like this account or this geography maps directly to this human being, you're setting your systems up for pain. So even if you actually have a geographic alignment, really what you're doing is you're mapping the geography to a territory X, and then that territory is actually mapped to that to that user in the system, that human being, because that can change, that can evolve over time. But our actual understanding of mapping is hard coded within the systems for reporting and quota setting.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so one of the things I heard is don't assume as you approach territories, whether it's for the first time or even maybe like how you approach territories within your own business or company, don't assume that geographies or really anything else are like where you should start or even be going to. Like you said, take the customer-centric view, focus on what would be best for your buyer and how you can map and align your territory process there. And actually, next question for you, hit on this a little bit in terms of you mentioned like what you've seen people do well and not do well. I guess let's talk about the not do well. So when it comes to, you mentioned some of the customers you've done consulting for a lot of clients in this space as well. So let's first start with like mistakes or challenges. So when it comes to territories specifically, what are some of the most common mistakes or challenges that you've seen people make?
Yeah. So the concept of territory is about balancing the workload requirements to serve the customers with the pool of potential or the pool of revenue that could be generated against that sales motion. And the biggest gap that we typically see is organizations not leveraging the data they have to infer if that relationship or that mapping is actually done well. And it's very easy to go in and you look at your territory or your account mapping and see that, okay, our revenue distribution seems pretty proportionate. Even the number of accounts is relatively consistent. But as organizations, you have just so much more data. And if you start to segment your customers based off of the patterns of behavior that they have with how they engage with your services or products, if you start to segment your customers based off of their purchasing history and timing, really, the more data you have, the more you can start to do this and then see if there are any correlations or predictions that highlight to us any kind of imbalances with our assumption of what is the balancing metric. So maybe just pure revenue, historical revenue, that's rarely a good measure of like, is a territory well balanced? But you could say, okay, historical revenue, account number of accounts, and number of employees in the customer base maybe is a good benchmark of potential for us. But then organizations typically will enact that, and that becomes their standard of measuring territory balancing for the next 5 to 10 years without actually pushing yourself every planning cycle to really be seeing, are there any biases? Are there any correlations in the data that's showing that actually organizations that have bought in these specific time periods tend to actually have much higher potential? And lo and behold, there's a territory that has 30 of these accounts, and now we're way understaffing this territory. You would only uncover that if you actually went a step or two deeper in your data analysis to uncover these insights. I think that's typically something that we see organizations miss. It's low-hanging fruit that you can just infer from your own data.
Yeah. Yeah. So leaving, like you said, leaving data on the table and not going beyond surface level, just being like, oh, number of accounts, or like you said, some basic math, but not actually going into more quality on what your territories tell you.
Yeah, for every territory that you have, you need to have some semblance of what is the potential score that you associate with that territory. And ideally, you're doing it at kind of the more granular level, right? At that account level, you're saying, okay, this is the methodology that we're going to use to set the potential. And the interesting thing is organizations will do that, and then they set and forget it. They rarely update it, whatever their concept of potential is. When in reality, every day we have access to more and more data. You'd be surprised how many public data sources like start to highlight and bring really good insights to fruit, or insights to bear just by bringing in external data sources that are tied to the zip code or the actual geographic level that you can start to overlay with your existing account base as an example. And my point is stress test that definition of potential constantly.
Yeah.
And see where there's certain correlations. On the other side of the equation, which is the workload concept, this one we should have a better grasp of, but I think anytime you're looking at sales process or your sales motion, you should be thinking about it as, okay, for this specific sales motion by account type, how much of a rep's time, how much of a rep resource do we actually need to execute against this sales motion? And if you can bring that data in, you now have kind of the two key pillars that you're going to use to determine if there's a balance in your territory level. Okay, at an account level, we need to run these types of sales motions against these types of accounts. This is how much potential exists. This is how much workload exists. Are these two things balanced or not? And now that kind of gives you a very data-driven approach to at least test the territory boundary lines and the balancing that the sales leadership and sales management is doing.
Yeah. Do you have any, you mentioned some of those like free resources that people may not be aware of that maybe they could be taking advantage of. Do you have any examples of those?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the industry that you're in. There are certain data sources that are much easier to get than others in terms of parsing. But if you're in the education space, you can you have budgets at a federal level, state level, school district level. You can buy some of these data sources. Obviously, they prepare and clean the data. But even things like the population at a zip code FSA level, that data is readily available. You can get weather pattern data, see if there's any trends between certain weather patterns. And I understand this seems like it's that last one specifically, like what correlations are you going to pick up? But you'd be surprised. And the point is the more that you can bring in and map and correlate, but it is industry specific. And I would push you could bring more in and it just takes more resources to analyze it.
Yeah. So for folks who might be doing territories, for folks who might be listening and doing territories at that surface level today and not going one step deeper, what advice would you give them on where to start? How can they take the first step towards going from what they've got today to getting that next level of detail that they need to hit on all the pieces that you just mentioned?
I think the first step is creating some sort of segmentation to look at all the accounts that exist within your universe in different buckets. So you might create a few different segmentations, right? By account size, by historical purchasing patterns, by
industry,
by industry, et cetera. So create those segmentations. And once you have that defined, and then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to map that against. So the second layer is to bring in any sort of data that you can use in your potential equation. You may already have that potential equation, but if not, bring additional data into the mix just to see if there's a correlation between the segmentations that we've already done and the ones that have actually produced. And one of the things that we typically think of segmentation as purely based off of account attribute. I would push to create some sort of segmentation around the definition of like success within that account or capture rate. And so now what would be interesting is to see if there's any correlation between certain attributes and successful accounts versus non-successful accounts. Just by doing that exercise alone, you're going to start to, in the ideal state, what you get this map of is good territories and good reps, good territories, bad reps, bad reps, good territories, and then bad reps and bad territories. And now you look at this map and are able to dig deeper into the territories that you need to balance and not balance.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Moving on from territories, you get the next step is quota setting, giving people targets. And again, I've seen this in my past, right? You're just like, okay, your OTE is 150, multiply that by 5, and hey, guess what? Your quota is, $750,000, right? Or whatever, right? So why do I need to do more than that? Like Nabeil, I just gave everyone like a very like simple free way to set quotas. Why is that wrong? What is how should people actually be thinking about quotas and why are they so important?
That in of itself is not actually, I wouldn't say that is wrong, because it's always coupled to how you set territories. So if you perfectly balance territories to the penny, okay, like we are perfected the balancing of territories, then this methodology for setting quota might actually be pretty reasonable, because we balance territories in such a way that 2,000 business hours of work a year should produce 750K in this plot of land or this plot of accounts that we've given you. If that is the case, if you perfected territory mapping, then that quota setting methodology it's fine. Everyone in the company can have the same. Almost impossible to do that. It's almost impossible to do that for a lot of reasons. The single perfect one would be like, is every customer that buys something from your organization paying the exact same amount, buying the exact same products and services on a consistent basis? Most times it's no. And so, okay, now you don't have a quantized bit that like you can guarantee you're going to get to 750K for each one, right? Because you have different customers that require different selling motions, more work here than over here, 50K deal over here, 300K deal over here. Now, how do you balance the territory perfectly? You don't. And then you factor in, and this is the other part that really breaks this kind of quota setting methodology or approach, if you're going to go down this path where you have fixed quotas for everyone, is not every customer in that geography or that territory is going to buy at the same time. And that's actually much harder data to get. It's very easy to get easier to get data that tells you this is the potential that exists within an account. Very difficult to get data that tells you they're going to buy this specific service in this time. So now you're running a situation where you think you're being equitable and giving everyone the same quota. But in reality, what you've done is you've actually given everyone a different opportunity of achieving said quota. And then the ultimate result of that, let alone the inequity, inequity in it, but more importantly, we base performance against quota as the measure of how good or bad a rep is. So quota setting is arguably the most important process of all of this. Because if I set bad quotas, then I have no idea who the good reps are and who the bad reps are, which means that best case, okay, I just maybe pay a little bit more in comp than I should. Worst case, I'm actually having great reps leave my organization because they're not in the money, because they're not performing to quota, because they have a bad territory, et cetera, et cetera. For all those reasons, I don't think, it's the ideal way to set targets.
So you can't look at these things separately. Right. The territories are not separate from quotas. They need to be looked at collectively. So for folks out there who maybe are doing this math and this planning separately and not leveraging this data together, if that's the wrong way, then what's the right way? How should folks make sure that they're tying territories and quotas together in a way that eliminates the inequity, drives performance, and allows you to answer those questions of who are my best performing reps and who is not?
Yeah. So that exercise that you went through to figure out the potential that exists within a territory and the corresponding workload, that data from the territory at the account level should feed into, or even at the aggregate level, but obviously you get more you get more accuracy, more testability if you do it at the account level. That should feed into your quota setting process. And when you feed into the quota setting process, the easiest way to determine if this is actually going to have a positive impact is to build a quota setting model that's baked off of these attributes, and then run that methodology for prior year's data. So imagine like taking that methodology and you run it for 2020, you take 2022 data and you run it through this methodology to produce 2023 quotas. And then what you want to look at is, hey, the quota setting is now producing a new quota. You saw what the performance was in 2023 because we have that data now, and you overlay them and you look at, okay, does this give me a better distribution curve? One, are there biases in the quota? Are territories with larger quotas performing better than territories with smaller quotas on average? Are territories with a higher number of account versus low number of account? Are territories with a higher dollar potential that we've calculated versus lower? And so what you're looking at is the statistical analysis to see, is this quota setting methodology better than, worse than the current approach that we've done? And until you refine it to the point where, okay, we feel comfortable that there's no hidden biases or unseen correlations in the data, and you feel comfortable that it's actually getting you the quota distribution that you feel is going to produce the right result for the business, you don't use that methodology. But it's actually, if you do this, you can have very low-hanging fruit that you can uncover and unpack in terms of how you can produce those quotas.
Yeah, and that'll make sense as well. And quotas are obviously tied very close to then how you pay people and the incentives, the sales incentives, right? The compensation that people will make. So again, I'll use my own example, be like, nah, like just listen, 10% of whatever you sell, that's your commission. I'm guessing you're going to tell me like what you did before, right? That may or may not be wrong, but your sales incentive should probably tie back to the way that you're setting quotas and territories. So lay that out for me. Why, if I look at that again in its own, I don't know, silo, why can't I look at that separately from quotas and territories, or should I be looking at it all collectively?
So like the situation where it's, hey, 10%, like a fixed 10% rate actually makes sense is when you don't actually have a very good understanding of potential, the territories are not well defined, and now you don't have an option because you can't connect it back to territories and quotas. But you miss out a lot by just having a flat commission rate. And the reason why is now if I'm at 100 and if I'm at 95% to quota or whatever, and even if it's a non-formalized quota because we don't have a way of setting quotas for this business, hypothetically, we have an approximate number that we want to see produced from reps. And now the rep that's 95% to quota gets the 105% to quota, and they go up by whatever that is, like 11%. They go up by 10%. They're performing 11% more on versus their prior performance, and they make 11% more. So it's a linear like growth. It's not motivating. How are you going to push every last dollar out of every rep? So you miss the opportunity to pay for performance. And that's ultimately the other downside of it is you want your bottom reps to leave the organization because they're not making good money. And I want to take the money that I would have paid that bad rep and pay my top reps more, 2 times, 3 times more, so that they never leave the organization and they continue bringing the business into the company. And so the only way you can have that type of pay curve with serious accelerators in the top end is to know what good performance is. If you don't set quotas and you don't use that quota data, it's very difficult to peg the line of where we actually start applying accelerators. And if you don't set territories right, then I create my curve and accelerators, but then I end up getting it wrong because the reps that are in the bad territories are the good performers. They don't make money, they leave. The reps that are in the bad territories or in the really good territories end up being bad reps, and they can overperform and make a ton more money than we should be paying them.
Yeah. And when it comes to sales incentives and compensation plans, you've obviously probably seen a bunch of different varieties and I don't know, like things that people can do, things that work, things that don't work. What are some things that people can do that might be listening today that own compensation and incentives? What are some things that you would recommend they look at their comp plans for? And maybe it's, make sure they're tied back to, again, like the quota setting and the territories. Maybe it's, hey, actually, like these are some accelerators that a lot of people may not think of, but that typically work well. What are some things that people can consider or evaluate against their current comp plans that are out there for their own sales teams?
Yeah, I think if they're not tied back to quota and territory, then of course, like that's a very like low-hanging fruit that
That's
you
where to
should
start.
be thinking of. Yeah. The second thing to look at would be the pay distribution and the mix between your top performers and average, and then your bottom and average. If the kind of the benchmarks in an ideal is that you're paying anywhere between 10 to 50, like 10%, bottom 10 to 15% of your population should be making at most a third of what the average is making, and then you should be paying 2 to 3 times for your top 10 to 15%. What your average makes. And so that's an easy one right away. Okay, is my pay for performance curve actually tracking well against the way that I want to pay and ultimately driving attrition rates in the right part? I would say, I think just at a high level, incentives are interesting because there is an infinite number of ways you can be super creative, and we've seen all kinds of things. The answer, a simple answer, most people will say, okay, keep incentives simple. And so you can assess your plan for how simple it is. But the simplicity part is really like, is it well understood? And you can have an incentive plan with multiple components. You typically don't want to do any more than 3 to 4. That's like the most. So that's another thing to assess on. But really what you want to see or measure is, do your reps understand when they're running through a sales motion, are they in a position where they understand the levers at play and know when to pull the levers to maximize their earnings for said sales motion? And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. If you're planning cycle and you're thinking about next year plans and you're trying to drive a behavior, if you don't go through that motion to understand where your reps are thinking about the comp plan throughout a sales process, kind of missing the mark of like, okay, well, now I'm going to add a kicker for multi-year.
Yeah,
sure. But where in the sales process is the multi-year component actually, is the term length discussed? And for example, if it's discussed way earlier in the sales process where there's the handoff, but for some reason it's discussed by the BDR, for example, that's teeing the conversation up for an AE. If term length is discussed there, then maybe we're not incentivizing the right person to be talking about multi-year length. That's not the greatest example, but the point is like flowing through and tying the sales motion to the incentives and how reps think about that is probably a really good exercise to do if you're going through a planning process right now.
Yeah. The multi-year thing is a good example. You can't just like, oh, well, I'm going to throw that in the comp plan and then not do anything else and assume that, one, like you said, people will know about it and what it means, and that two, they'll be able to pull the right levers at the right time because they have control over that. So there's a big enablement part to all of that. And yeah, you just can't take it for granted. You got to be intentional about those things.
Because for everything you do, there's a give and take, right? Like even if this example, you add a multi-year kicker, but now what's the take? We may get lower pricing or reduce pricing to get to multi-year terms. And so now you have to think about, again, where is it in the sales process? What's the guardrail that we're going to put up against this give to mitigate price degradation, as an example? The ultimate takeaway I always say is you should design a comp plan that, when gamed, produces the outcome that you want. And it's very difficult to understand how it's going to be gamed if you're not putting yourself in the shoes of the rep throughout the sales process.
Yeah. And that's a really good example. The multi-year thing is a really good example of that, because again, let's say your quotas are set like that 750 number I magically gave you before, right? Let's say that's based on ARR, right? You do the multi-year kicker. To do that, you typically need to provide some sort of discount that results in lower ARR. Is that lower reduction, therefore, against someone's quota with the multi-year kicker, going to be incentive for them to actually want to do that? And then the flip side is, again, just think from a business perspective, like if you have auto renewals or other things in your contract, like what's the risk trade-off that you're willing to make, right? If you're well-established product company, low minimal churn, like maybe those multi-year agreements aren't anything that you actually care about as a business. So while sure, they sound great on surface, right? Like, oh, I've got you locked in for 2 years, 3 years. Like, again, and actually the flip side of that is, at the end of the day, like you've got someone locked in for 2 or 3 years. Let's say they're like, get to the end of the first year and they're like, yeah, you know what? We're just not going to move forward and I'm just not going to pay you. What are you going to do then? Like, you got to enforce the contract if you actually want to, and like, do you want to actually go through all that? So again, it's just like, these things that are like, oh yeah, throw it in the comp plan, or oh yeah, we want multi-year deals. Like you just need to like think through that and be intentional about it.
100%, 100%. And to your point, tying to the customer journey is so critical because at the end of the day, like the individuals that are closest to the customers are being motivated by, if you think about it, very blunt force instruments. A multi-year kicker is not refined in the sense that it's not gonna, if you start to build in all the permutations of when it should apply and not apply, it starts to become insanely complicated. So you simplify a plan, that incentive is a blunt force instrument, and you have to be very careful to build the safety nets around it, to your point, to not cause all these other things. So yeah, I mean, I always say incentive planning, all the way from territory to quota to incentives, like you can't do it in isolation. Everyone in the organization needs to be a part of these kind of conversations, like everything from the product managers that are thinking about the experience they want the customers to have, how they're going to use the product over time, the retention rates that we expect, to the sales leadership, to the customer support and success teams, to finance, HR, and the legal implications of this. Like it's a multi-stakeholder process. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got two more questions for you. They are not RevOps or work related at all. So first question for you is, outside of company building, outside of territories, quotas, sales incentives, like we talked about today, once you get to the end of the day, you close the laptop, what are you passionate about? What could people find you doing outside of work?
Spending time with my family. So I think with 2 kids keeps you busy. So it's probably number one. But if it's not that, then it's usually doing something outdoor, like a big hike, scaling a mountain would be like
nice.
pretty great Saturday afternoon. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then my second question that I'll end with. So we're hosting our annual RevOps conference, RevOpsAF, in May of 2025 in New Orleans. We'll have 300 to 350 revenue operators there. We're actually hosting a smaller EMEA-based event in Berlin for all of our EMEA kind of area revenue operators. That'll be in June of next year. But let's use the bigger New Orleans one to set the stage here. So like I said, we'll have 350 people in the audience. Let's say that you're speaking on the main stage at RevOpsAF. We call your name. The crowd goes nuts. Everyone starts cheering. They're super excited to hear your chat. You're entering stage left. What would be your walk-on song? What music would you play as you walk on stage to speak at RevOpsAF?
It's a good question. It's a good day.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I feel like it's either that or there's one of the songs that I play to myself would be like more Lose Yourself, but that's not like the walk-on song. That's the prep before. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, I'm an Eminem fan as well. Yeah. I think Lose Yourself would be a good choice. And I've asked a lot of people this question. I've gotten everything from like hip hop to emo, like pop punk. Someone actually said like classical music or songs from like the Sound of Music. So like musical theater. So trust me, people are all over the map, but I was trying to think of, there's no way you'd walk on EDM song, right? Like I'm the big EDM music guy, and I feel like it's like it's our age, it's classical music for this day and age. Yeah. And so it's beautiful, but it just doesn't feel like the pump up song. But yeah. No, good beat to it. Yeah. No, I'd challenge you I think EDM would work. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. But Nabeil, thank you very much, my friend, for taking some time to talk to us about everything from territories to quotas and how to best use data to support your planning process around all of those things. But that's all I got for you. So I appreciate it, my man. We'll see you around.
Yeah, it's great chatting.
All right. Thank you.
Keep it RevOpsAF. For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.